Today, I speak to my good friend Zvi Band, the founder of Contactually, about a lot of different things, but Web3, human connections, and authenticity.
This is Notorious POD, the podcast for the best informed people in the real estate industry. Rob Hahn is your host, and Notorious is where the real estate industry comes for real talk with no bullshit.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Notorious Pod. This is obviously your host. Hello, thanks for checking us out. And when I say us, I mean me, at least for now. But it will shortly be us because I'm actually pretty excited to have this conversation. I've been trying to set this up for a while with my good friend Zvi Band, who many of you know as the founder of Contactually. How you doing, Zvi?
Good. Based on like your comments before this, it sounds like I'm like so incredibly unavailable and busy and everything like that. And the latter might be true, but the former, I'm like, I don't know. Have I been trying to avoid you?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, like you and my wife talk like every day, so it's not that. I know the general outline of stuff, but yeah, for whatever reason, we just couldn't get, something like this together. But I've been wanting to do this ever since you did your first, sort of moves in the post-Contactually world, all of which are interesting, by the way. So hopefully we'll have time to get into all of that today.
Thank you. Yeah, maybe I have a quota in terms of like how much time per week I'm allowed to contribute to the Hahn household.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah. Maybe it should be like her interviewing you and just having this conversation, but she didn't want to because we're going to get into some nerdery and geekery. And she's like, I'm not enough of a nerd or geek. I dated in high school and stuff like that. So, she begged off. You probably dated in high school too. I did not.
No, I was in the computer room. Yeah. Just be clear.
I was in the philosophy and metaphysics room.
Ooh, that's even nerdier these days.
Oh, dude, it was so nerdy. Like, I don't know. Like, at some point, there has to be some sort of nerd. Is there a test? Like, how nerdy are you?
I don't know. Like, was there like Mensa was a big thing for a little while?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm talking like the nerd culture. Like, have you played Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah, I have played once, only once.
Okay, so you rank low, whereas I've like actually DM'd, so I think I'm higher on the nerd scale.
Wow. See, and I actually surprisingly very low. Like I've never played Settlers.
Okay.
I've never seen all of the Lord of the Rings.
Okay. You're super low on the nerd scale.
And
right now.
I hate Harry Potter.
Okay. Yeah.
I've never played Pokemon.
Magic the Gathering?
Oh yeah, no, hardcore. Like I still have my cards.
Okay. Yeah, see, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm like Dungeons and Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Vampire the Masquerade. I actually work for Wizards of the Coast.
Really?
Yeah.
That's some awesome street cred for your listeners.
Yeah, and I don't know when were you playing Magic the Gathering? Do you know?
God, this was like probably like
it's in the 90s.
Yeah, like late 90s, like 1996, 1998 or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have by any chance of memory of a website called The Dojo?
No.
Okay.
Was that your?
That was me. And it was like the first real kind of, and there's a whole story behind that. So I went to work for The Duelist, worked at Wizards of the Coast. I was on the Pro Tour, like.
That's pretty cool.
Dude, there's like nerd royalty to some extent, right?
Yeah, there's a very weird period of time when I went to college where like all of a sudden like a lot of my friends, including some people who like would classify themselves as jocks, were like playing Magic the Gathering. Like it was like 3 months where all of a sudden like Magic the Gathering was like cool again for college students.
Yeah.
And then it disappeared again. So I don't know what happened there, but I sell my cards and every once in a while, like maybe.
You might want to check the value of some of those cards, man. I'm just saying. I don't know if you have any.
I don't know. It must be like, it's more like, Schrodinger's cat or something like that. It's like the value is infinite as long as I don't look. Because once I look, I'm most likely going to be incredibly disappointed. It's kind of it's kind of like my crypto portfolio.
Kind of like crypto portfolio. Yeah.
It's almost like better not to look. Like
I haven't looked. I haven't looked in weeks. But it's kind of I remember in law school, I was traveling somewhere and I had my deck with me because I thought I might play. And just for fun, I laid out the cards and what the value of this stack of fucking cardboard is. Yeah. And it was more than like my food budget for the year. Wow. And I was like, I got to sell this. If I'd held on to it, I think I could buy a house.
Is there really that much value? Like, have Magic cards? I mean, I guess like the whole collectibles market has really taken off. I didn't realize Magic's that valuable.
Yeah, it's collectible. I mean, but I had the full Power 9, you know, like all this stuff, beta, all this stuff that are like
I might break
tens of thousands.
House tonight.
Yeah. But we, like I said, you know, we took a while, but thanks for coming on, and we have a lot to talk about, aside from just nerdery, you know. Although we could probably spend an hour doing that too, because you've been up to some really cool shit, man. Ever since you sold Contactually to Compass, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I was a GM there for a couple of years.
Yeah.
Left in January 2021, and the way I like to frame it is, you know, it's like after 7.5 years focusing, or 9.5 years, including my time at Compass, being focused on one idea, one company, to all of a sudden being an all-you-can-eat buffet.
Yeah.
And my problem is I put way too much on my plate. I love it all, right? All the food looks good. I put it all on my plate, right? But like, if you and I were to ever go to like, you know, a Vegas buffet, you would see like that. I don't care how much weight I've lost. I will load my plate up with everything that looks good. I did that entrepreneurially.
All right, man. We might have to make that Vegas buffet thing happen because, you know, we're here. But there's like, there almost feels like two things that are connected and yet somewhat distinct. So let's just talk about them in order. First of all, you're an author.
Yes.
The name of the book is?
Success is in Your Sphere.
That's right.
And so basically I launched that in 2019. And actually I've been working on that for 2015, like writing a book. If anyone wants to write a book, I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one and talk you out of writing a book. It was, you know, the insight was, and this actually relates to like what I'm doing in Good Sphere now, actually with Sunny, also, is that, you know, after spending so many years building software to help people maintain relationships, I learned that all we were really giving people was a tool. And you don't need a tool per se. Like if you want a problem solved, you need a strategy. And that's like systems and habits and knowledge, and tools, of course, is part of that. And so many people over the years were coming to Contactually basing like, hey, this is cool, but like, how do I organize my relationships? Mm-hmm. Like I can like message people. What do I say? And we're like, oh, interesting. We didn't think we'd have to solve this problem. And so we spent obviously like, you know, knowing, you know, thousands of like some of the best agents and professionals in the world. We kind of distilled, we had enough like know-how, and that's actually ended up what being like was the core behind the book.
Wow. It fits in with, I think you called it your ikigai. Am I saying that the right way?
Yeah.
Okay, what is ikigai, first of all?
Yeah, I'm going to butcher it, and you know this is totally cultural misappropriation, just to be clear, right? Into this, but like, you know, it's a Japanese concept of basically like if you could imagine 4 circles in your head, and you can look up ikigai, IKIGAI. They're 4 circles. Like it's what you're good at, what you can get paid for, what you enjoy doing, and what the world needs. And the dream, right, and the ideal is to find the overlap between those 4 circles.
Right.
And what I found myself kind of like, what, you know, obviously I have a very dense one, but what came down to it is I am really passionate, and I believe I'm here for building tools for human connection. Mm-hmm. And looking back, and I only did this in like 2019 or something like that. But looking back, like that's what Contactually was. Like Contactually was a tool to enable human connection. And now the projects I'm working on, by and large, all kind of fit into that general theme of building tools for human connection in very, very different ways.
Mm-hmm. No, and it's beautiful, man. I mean, and I've gotten, I don't know, I feel like ever since the start of the pandemic, I've gone on this sort of a bit of a journey myself. And one of the people that I follow the most kept talking over and over about, like, he's like a wealth manager, you know, type of guy. And he kept saying over and over, ever since like the pandemic bust out, you know, like wealth, people measure it by money and assets and buildings and all this stuff. It's like, nah, it's people, right? Mm-hmm. It's all just people. Like the most important thing in your life is going to be relationship, people you know, the people you love, people love you. And it's right in line. I think, at least with what, you know, what you're suggesting, the human connections, you know, piece.
Yeah.
So I love it, man.
Even for me, like, you know, and actually to riff on that for a second, one of the books that's been most formative in my life over the past few years has been a book called The Second Mountain. Have you read it?
No, I'm writing it down right now.
David Brooks, you know, former actually conservative columnist.
No, never. It's never conservative. I think you're on the opposite sides of that spectrum, so I can tell you
exactly.
like that.
But he wrote this book, basically like the idea like behind the second mountain is that like most of us spend our lives trying to climb a mountain, focus on like, again, like, success and, monetary assets and bigger cars and houses and stuff. And oftentimes as we kind of get to quote the peak of that mountain, we realize that there's actually a different mountain that we've been trying to climb. That's much more about like meaning and purpose and joy and everything like that. And it kind of goes into like, there's a valley in between. And so like, honestly, like part of it, like as I sold Contactually, I was like, well, what is real meaning in my life for me? And it's not just like starting just like another business, but it's like pursuing things that like are more in line with like purpose and meaning for me.
Right. No, I love it, man. And I know the work you guys are doing with Good Sphere, obviously, because Sunny's there, helping you guys out. Just let's talk about that real briefly, and then we'll dive into tech stuff. Like, so what's the idea behind Good Sphere? Yeah,
the idea behind Good Sphere, to be clear, is I've learned, again, going to the same idea behind the book, like we spent, and for anyone who's used Contactually or another CRM and frankly wanted to use it but didn't use it, we spent years at Contactually trying to make our product easier to use and how to like add game mechanics and better training and everything like that. And after a while, we realized like, it's not the software, it's the person trying to use that software. Right? Like, for example, it doesn't matter how good our email templates are or how good we are about reminding you to reach out to someone. If deep down, you're never going to press that send button because you're feeling to yourself, oh, I haven't spoken to this past client in 2 years. They hate me. Right? Mm-hmm. Or I'm not good enough to reach out to that person, or they're going to think I'm slick and salesy and everything like that. Or, when it comes to using a CRM, it doesn't matter how easy it is to use it and everything like that. If just at the end of the day, you're so busy responding to, incoming leads and Facebook messages and text messages you get that you never actually take the time to say, wait, what do I need to do for my business versus reacting to my inbox? And so we basically said, like, there are all these behavioral blockers and we need to focus on solving those. And so we basically and honestly, again, I'm friends with a lot of people in the real estate coaching world, and I've checked out every program and I love them all, but we saw that something was really, really missing in addressing the root causes, which is how do you be happier and more successful and more confident, and then yes, of course, more organized and know how to reach out to people, etc. And so we saw there are all these behavioral blockers, and that's frankly why we founded Good Sphere back in January of last year, because we're something's missing from the world, and the best thing I could do isn't necessarily just hone software a little bit more, but actually help people in a much more direct way.
Nah, it's cool, man. It's cool. Yeah, dude, so remind me, we need to have a conversation about Red Pill and some of the stuff I found over 10 years of researching millennial demographics. But there's a lot of, so let me see if I could make sense of this. So back when I was still doing product management, right? Yeah. I remember getting involved in a CRM project. And I remember saying, look, what CRM should we use? And I'm I can't answer that because CRM is not about the tool. It's not about the software. It's about what do you guys do internally? What's your process, right? Mm-hmm. So it's almost what you're suggesting goes beyond that. It's not just your process, your personality. It's your psychology, right? There are certain things that I think I'm comfortable with. In terms of whatever, building relationships or sales or whatever it is, that others aren't going to be comfortable with, and vice versa. There are things that they're really good at that it's just not me, in a real weird way, more and more, the older I get, right? The less I am in the dating market, more I analogize a lot of this to dating, right? There are people who are really good at walking up to strangers in bars, be hey, how you doing? And there are others who just aren't, but they're really good at sort of one-to-one or, introducing friends. You know what I mean? It's just so personality driven, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's why, honestly, even though like I actually have a personal CRM platform that I've launched and it has like hundreds of users now, I actually generally, when people ask like what CRM they should use, I'm like, I just don't think you should use a CRM, right? Because there's so many things you have to get through in order to then get to the point of using a CRM. Like, again, like one thing like Sunny and I teach in like the Good Sphere program, like there are basic things you could do on your phone that like master those first before you think about like setting up a database. Like start with a spreadsheet. I don't care, right?
No, that's the thing. So you hear stories about these agents who are superbly successful and amazing, 40-year career, and their CRM is a bunch of Post-it notes.
Yeah,
It's like, it works because that fits their personality, their psychology, their personality, everything. So like, it almost feels like you guys have to get into psychology. Like, you got to fix the person first, and then, right?
And to be honest, like that's a key part. Like we teach like meditation in our program and gratitude journaling, all these like deeper stuff, because we realize, and there's a lot we go throughout like our program. But if you wake up every day feeling overwhelmed, feeling afraid, feeling like the Sunday scaries, like we actually have a program called the Sunday Scaries now. If you spend all of your time in reactive mode and afraid of what's going to happen, you are hopeless when it comes to being proactive. So like part of it is like helping you improve not just your relationship with your sphere of influence, but with yourself as well. And so the two are very tightly interlinked. And a lot of people are like, I don't need this. Just like help me organize my database and give me email templates. And then by the end of the 12-week program, they're like, oh, forget all like the stuff you talked about organization. And like, yeah, sure. Like that's great. But like, I feel better as a person. Right? There was like, obviously, this, like, the busy season in the real estate world isn't exactly the friendliest on like emotional state and your relationships. And there was one client of ours last year who she said, like, this is the first busy season I've had where I didn't turn to my husband every other week and scream, I quit at him. And we're like, oh, well, if we help you do that, then fantastic.
Yeah. That's better than, getting you another commission check,
Yeah, exactly. And that's a big problem.
So hopefully, this first, I don't know, like I knew this was a big important context and some of the things you're working on, in the sort of the real estate side that we both know so well. What's fascinating, what made me really want to talk to you is I discovered you're like really deep in the crypto blockchain side. And I fell down that rabbit hole in 21. And I listened to the first webinar you did, trying to explain this to, I mean, would you call it a real estate audience, or would you call it more of a general interest audience? I mean, there were some people on that webinar who were experts,
Yeah, I mean, so I've done a couple like intro to like Web3 kind of like sessions, and Web3 obviously being like basically anything that's kind of come out of like blockchain, cryptocurrency, blah, blah, et cetera. Like there's a lot of stuff. I actually realized, like, to your point, like you and I have, quote, been red pilled, over the past couple of years. And I just saw like the journey I had to go through from going, I know nothing, and this seems really scary, to, oh, I know so much and I've seen the matrix. And it's so hard for people to make that jump as it stands today, that I was like, I wasn't necessarily aiming at a real estate audience. I was just actually aiming at just like, quote, my normie friends and family. And there were like obviously Good Sphere clients on there. And then like friends from high school. My 95-year-old grandfather was on there too, on one of them. And it was like, hey, I just want you to at least understand what's happening, so you're not afraid of it. Like, let me handhold you through the first steps, not to try and like, quote, crypto pill you, but at least have you understand the basics so you can decide from yourself, versus going, oh, no, this is really scary.
So tell me from your perspective, how does that, because the way I look at it, look, you got into it, obviously you have a technical background, so you understand some of the science and technology behind it better than I do, better than most people do. But your ikigai is building human connections, right? Like, what's your take right now? Does that fit in? Does this whole world, crypto, blockchain, Web3 fit in with that? Like, what's the connection?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so my interest in Web3 started off more from like a a personal standpoint. Like I've been a crypto investor just on the side, like buying, bits of Bitcoin and Ethereum for a few years, but it's really only over the past, I would say like 9 months even, where I started to see more and more of my friends, this sounds weird, like disappear, disappear from like the normal, let's call it a Web 2 world of their startups or investing. And they just say like, I'm going all in on crypto. I was like, I had no idea what that means. Right.
Yeah.
And many people have done this too.
Yeah.
And I was like, and even developers, I'm like, this is interesting. Something's happening here. Like, what is this? Right. I'm sure you can kind of like,
point dude, that's right here.
Yeah. And I haven't seen that in a while. Like some people like, there's a switch to mobile or like, early days of the internet. Sure. But like we're witnessing like really, really smart talent just pick up and like drop their safe world behind and just go all in on this crazy new frontier. I was like, all right, something's happening here. But actually, like, to answer the point around like my own personal interest beyond in terms of my ikigai, I mean, and we could riff for a long time around this, but I feel that like the two big problems in our world are climate change and loneliness. And I do believe on the latter point, which is definitely much more within my ikigai, there are two big problems that we need to solve. One is I do believe that we need better models of gathering and community. Again, like not to get too philosophical, but one of the theses I've developed and many others back up is that over the past like 50, 60 years, we've been like this very hyper individualistic society, and we need to find new models that bring us back into community. And then the other point is that nowadays, as you know, like there are a lot of like, frankly, antisocial incentives out there, right?
Okay.
That like, for example, when you think about like what like how like Facebook or other social platforms have frankly like corrupted our desire to connect with others, where now we almost go on and we post something, and unless like something gets with 5 likes within the first 5 minutes, we think that not only is that content worthless, but we are worthless, right? And like, how broken is that? Like, that asynchronous reactions to like something like it's basically turned our lives into a popularity contest. So therefore, all of a sudden, we're only sharing stuff about our lives that gets lots of reactions, to the point where like TikTok, like at this point, frankly, and again, I think it's really cool, but let's take a step back. It's basically a nonstop talent show. That's literally it. It is a talent show. And it's kind of aiding our hyper individualism and not necessarily our ability to actually connect with people on a deeper level. And the other point of this is, and I remember, do you remember Groupon?
Of course.
First off, Groupon is still around. Who knows? Yeah. But like they actually came up with a website or an app that literally had 2 buttons on it. Like I'm hungry and I'm bored. And when you think about that, like that's frankly, those are incentives that drive us a lot. And nowadays, Rob, like, as you know, like it's a lot easier for you and Sunny to, press a button on your phone and order pizza on Uber Eats than it is to press a button on your phone and reach out to someone that you haven't spoken to in a while. Right. And so as I thought, just kind of, and I'll end my rant, as I thought about this, like new models for community and gathering and better incentive structures, as you know, like, kind of being in the Web3 space yourself, that maps pretty cleanly to like what we're seeing in DAOs and then tokenomics and token incentives, where it's not like game mechanics and point systems, but like you can actually have like on-chain reputations and rewards based on your activity. I'm like, so that is what like got me to be really, really focused, especially over the past 6 months, on how do I build tools for human connection within the Web3 space.
Right. All right. So we have
I ranted for a while there.
No, I love it, man, because I don't mind getting into the philosophy of things, and what's interesting to me is you said your 2 biggest problems are climate change and loneliness. Whereas at least, my change over the last couple of years, now I feel like the 2 biggest problems are centralization, I guess on one hand, and fiat currency, right? Because And I don't know if you ever follow or heard, who is it? Like, I want to say it's Michael Saylor, but it might be Breedlove who connects climate change to fiat money. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
No, it's Safety. It's Safety Amuse who loves to just go on this rant. I don't know how much I buy into his whole
thing. That dude is a Bitcoin maximalist.
I know, but like when he talks about how the fiat currency system we live in drives climate change because it leads to having to this growth year over year over year. We just have to grow. I don't know if I buy it or not, right? But at least it's a narrative, right? He talks about fiat food, because we're having currency that's getting devalued, so therefore food has to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. The only way we get there is through this artificial crap and all this stuff. Again, I don't know how much I buy into it, but it's a narrative. It makes sense. So for me, it's always been about, to me, the two big problems: centralization and fiat money. So for me, Bitcoin, like blockchain, Web3, like I'm 100% within that ethos.
Yeah,
right?
And I think within that, like, totally agree. Like and obviously, listen, one of the funny things, as is that almost like crypto has forced every person, including a 22-year-old kid who hasn't held a job before, to all of a sudden be a macroeconomics expert.
Correct.
Right? And I'm like, listen, there are lots of stories, there are lots of ideas. I'm not sure which one. You kind of pick and choose, and find the narratives that best fit you. And I do believe that one of our root issues to the centralization theme is that as something becomes more centralized and aggregates power, it becomes a lot more extractive, right? And I mean, corrupt. Again, yeah, and
power corrupts, right?
Yeah, and again, look at what's happening in social platforms, right? And again, I don't look at Facebook, for example, and say Facebook is inherently wrong. No, Facebook is guided by really great, smart people who are trying to do the best for the incentives that have been laid out for them, right? Shareholder value and everything like that. And from that, unfortunately, it's become highly extractive and not necessarily for the benefit of all the participants involved. And the magic, and what I'm excited about specifically around DAOs, is that all of a sudden you have a potential entity where, because it's so easy for stakeholders to become owners and direct decision making, hopefully it's less extractive and a lot more communitarian, right?
Yeah, completely. Now, look, there's probably a different podcast where we have to talk about problems with DAOs because the legal status and again, et cetera, et cetera. But I will make this point. Yeah. By the way, anyone who's made it to this point should understand DAO is decentralized autonomous organizations. This is a blockchain native form of organizing. But if you don't watch, one of Zvi's videos where he explains it,
or go online again, because it's so early and it's formative, read a bunch of blog posts, read 15 blog posts about DAOs, you're going to get 15 slightly different answers. Sure. Right.
But having said that, I mean, one of the big problems is that the existence of DAO is running headlong into sort of the centralized authority model that we have, right? It's where things like securities laws are being used in order to make DAOs problematic, right? Where you say, well, I have this governance token. Yes, but it's a security and you're not an accredited investor. So now we're going to sue you and sue the DAO and, try and control this stuff. And it's things like that I'm having issues with. Ultimately, I think the DAO and the Web3 way wins. Ultimately.
Yeah, I feel it historically, it's very hard to stop technological progress. Exactly. It's just a matter of time, which is why, again, I remember, there was a time where, the founder of Uber was, basically on the verge of getting arrested many, many times over in San Francisco, their first launch city, right? And you found, the kind of the regulatory framework to navigate that. And I'm seeing the same thing happen in crypto. To be honest, we're at the moment, we're not, Camp Social, we're not a DAO, right? We're a standard Delaware C corporation. Why? Because there's a lot of stuff yet to be figured out, to the point where, if I do the wrong thing, I could technically be in jail about something, right? And audited. And I'm and that's where I'm not worried. It's more it's just a matter of time and patience. Correct. Until we figure those things out.
And in that vein, I mean, I think today the European EU Parliament is voting on whether they want to ban proof of work. right, in the EU or not. I mean, the vote probably already happened given the time difference. I haven't seen the news to see where it came out. But when I heard that, I'm listening to a couple of guys, I'm like, all right, I mean, you could ban it in the EU, but that doesn't stop. You can't stop the code. You know what I mean? It just migrates.
That might help. That might actually help aid incentive, right? Because the proof of work is obviously what Bitcoin and Ethereum were founded off of. But much newer chains have pointed out like proof of work is like actually like again like it's highly energy intensive and frankly like generally wasteful. What has technology done? Technology has naturally kind of found like a better solution. So like now there's proof of stake and other kind of models, and maybe like a regulation can like kick you along a little bit.
Maybe. I mean, we could have that debate because I'm a big fan of proof of work, huge fan for Bitcoin. Anyway, not for Ethereum. Ethereum should be POS or something else, But then again, there's proof of history. But let's not go down that path quite that far. So here's my question for you. Because look, there are a lot of experts in Web3 and blockchain out there. The number of people, and there are a lot of experts who are in real estate, especially residential real estate. The overlapping circle starts to be vanishingly small. And you are one of them. So let me ask you kind of what I've been asking myself for the last, 18 months. Where do you see the applicability of blockchain and Web3 in real estate? What do you see as being the most promising?
Can I give an answer that you're not going to like?
No. Go. I mean, what I mean is, give me an answer. Yeah, of course. I don't have to like it.
My general framework around anything Web3, and frankly, this even applies to mine, is who knows, but let's try a bunch of things.
I like it.
And honestly, like, I've spoken to some of the best investors and, one of the, around Web3, and one of the theses that kind of keeps coming up, which is like, I apply is like, this is so new that like the level of neuroplasticity necessary is like incredible, right? Like who knew, right? I remember like when, my parents, to date me, right? My parents like brought home the first home computer and we got dial up and everything like that. And it took half an hour to download a website. By the way, do you remember the website? This is a good nerd pill. Do you remember the show Babylon 5?
Yeah.
One of the first websites that my dad ever pulled up was like just a bunch of set pictures from Babylon 5.
Okay.
Right. And like, who knew that like, when we first got our home computer, that within a very short period of time, very short period of my life, all of a sudden I would have this magical device with all the world's information. I'd press a button and a stranger would show up outside my house and I'd get into his car and go wherever I wanted in the world. I'm like, again, like, and so that's why like I feel like with blockchain and real estate and a lot of things in Web3, like who knows? That being said, I feel there's like the things I've been thinking about with blockchain and real estate. What blockchain is allowing is kind of two things. Like one is to show ownership in a very, very easy way. And that of course allows like transfer of ownership, fractionalization of ownership and everything like that, right? And clearly like what is the most important, what's the biggest asset in the world?
Real estate. Of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what everyone's focused on. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's going to be something and a lot of amazing innovations happening around ownership. The other side, and this is, I think, frankly, like a much more interesting one is, obviously, Bitcoin was like showing proof of ownership on the blockchain. Great. Cool. Like, that's a key part of it. But now we have the ability to have pre-designed ownership mechanisms. Programs that run on, again, Ethereum as like the world computer, and that can allow all sorts of crazy things, right? Could I, obviously, like one of the big innovations that we're seeing is the ability to design these, decentralized programs that instead of having a centralized company, it can just operate on the blockchain, and the general benefit to the consumer is lower take rates. Right? Mm-hmm. So obviously, like, looking at, let's say, the Airbnb take rate, right? Could I now not only let's say because it's so easy and frictionless for me to rent out my house, could I actually like rent out my kitchen for an afternoon to people? Because the level of friction has become so low to be able to rent out not just my house, but like literally any part of my house for even an hour at a time. And then to be able to do it at such a point where, you know, the take rates are much less than, let's say, of a centralized platform. And again, the whole idea of like, Zvi, you're talking in like, 2022 about like renting out your kitchen for an hour, and you and I could be sitting here in 5 hours, and in 5 years from now,
right.
And you have to jump up, like, oh, hold on, let me get the door. Someone wants to like borrow my kitchen and make cookies for an hour, right? Like,
yeah. That's an all right. Yeah, no, it's the reason I was asking is because I do feel like everyone is focused on title, because you're right, blockchain, immutable, right, etc. And I'm like, the problem with that for me has always been, right now the government controls title. The government controls ownership, at least of real property. I think digital assets on the chain, you don't really need that, because you don't need dudes with guns to show up to enforce your ownership rights. The smart contract will just do it for you. You know what I mean? Like, oh, they didn't pay. Here you go. Here's the coin, right? Yeah. It's something like physical goods, and especially real estate, like actual land, dude, that is absolutely the province of the government, period, end of story. So until the government comes along, we can do whatever we do in our side. But ultimately, that ownership right has to be enforced by the state. Yeah. Having said that, I'm like, but so it's focusing too much on that for me always felt a little bit like we're just, like some of the real innovations that we've seen, or some of the innovations, right? I've just been taking existing models and just adapting it slightly. So we were both around for Web 1.0, right? Yep. When like the graphical web came into being. And I keep thinking, like, the first time we saw this technology, what did we do? What we did is we took print stuff and we just put it into web pages. Exactly. So the website that I owned, the company that I started, that first time, it was effectively a magazine is what it was. Yeah. It just happened to be on a website instead of on paper. Or we mapped what we're doing offline into online. Auctions and flea markets have been around for a while. Okay, great. eBay, that makes sense, right? Exactly, right? And then, the first e-commerce websites, if you will, were essentially catalogs, right? That we just put into a website. Remember internet shopping malls. Do you remember? That was like a big thing. Internet shopping malls. What were we thinking? But so it's because what we knew, this is where we live in. Hey, there's this new technology. How do we? Okay, we're gonna take what we do. We're just gonna put it into this new technology, right? Yep. Web 2.0 comes along, and I don't know when we specifically sort of point to that, but let's just say like Facebook might be an example of that, where it's not. We're no longer like just a publisher that's just happening to publish online as opposed to a paper. Now we're enabling something else. Yeah. Right. Now the users themselves are publishers, things like that. Right. So Web3, when I look at it, it's the next step. It's essentially users are the publishers and there is no company. Like there's no Facebook. There's no central authority. So when I think of it in those terms, there's some real things I could imagine happening in real estate. And this then goes back to kind of your big thesis about connecting humans, right? So give you an example. I just heard a webinar that Dave Conroy from NAR did. And I think I wrote up a little brief thing. And the point I was making there was, no, maybe I haven't written up. Maybe I'm in the process of writing it up. Is the DAO, like to me, the most obvious application for the DAO is a realtor association. Oh, absolutely. Right? I mean, because a not-for-profit that's meant to connect people, right, to each other to achieve various goals, one of which is professionalism, one of which is, lobbying to protect property rights. And maybe a third is, I don't know, networking and, all of that, right? Yeah. And I remember asking him, why not? And he didn't really give me an answer, are there other things though like that? Could you see a real estate brokerage being operated as a DAO? Oh, absolutely. So this is, it's interesting that we're talking about this, because I would say one of the challenges in with a lot of the Web3 stuff is it's approaching
it's approaching like this whole world as like we are creating something that didn't exist. And in hindsight, like technology doesn't necessarily really as much like invent per se as much as it innovates, right?
Correct.
So there was a really big, again, as you know, I'm very big on DAOs. A couple months ago, FWB, like this big DAO that I'm part of, like one of the members published an article of like what DAOs and co-ops can learn from each other. And it was seen as this like widely like, oh, wow, that's amazing. Right. But in hindsight, like, yeah, of course, we're idiots. Like, you know, like condo boards have operated like this, you know, shared ownership, you know, co-ops, of course, like unions, like, you know, operating like, you know, for, you know, collective like decision making. Yeah, of course. So like, yeah, when I see like a realtor association, yeah, of course, it is a association that is meant to pool the collective efforts and insights of a body of people for the benefit of all involved, right?
That's
hopefully in a non-extractive way.
That's right.
Of course they should be DAOs. It may take a few years because there's a lot to figure out on DAOs, but like, I do believe that like in the future, like we're not going to be joining like, you know, unions, or we're not going to be joining companies or communities. Instead, we're going to join the DAOs that best represent and serve our purpose in our lives and our families. We're not going to call them DAOs, just like you want to talk about LLCs, but like what we're seeing today is at least going to be the formative structure behind that.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so this is an interesting connection. Like, in a way, doesn't that reinforce individuality? But it's like a positive individuality rather. In other words, when you were talking about we were maybe a too individualistic, I almost feel like you were mentioning it as like a negative individualist, like you're lonely, you're isolated, as opposed to this sort of more positive individuality, like it's about freedom and control and, you know, what my purposes are. Like talk to me about that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is a very, very deep subject, which honestly, like, again, like I'm very honest, like I'm still trying to wrap my head around as well. Because yes, there's a lot of that's happening in Web3 that's allowing like self-sovereignty, right? Which is again like this idea that like, I am responsible for my own ship, right? Like instead of, for example, my money being in a bank account, which yes, of course, while it's FDIC insured and everything, that's protected. A government or a entity could basically say you no longer access that money, right?
We've seen this happen.
Exactly. We're watching it happening. And self-sovereignty basically says like, oh, no, I'm responsible for my own assets and I am the captain of my own ship for better or for worse. As there's plenty of horror stories around that. I'm still trying to wrap my head around because you're right. There is this like individualism, but through that, there's this like much better alignment of incentives. And I, as an individual, am choosing to participate in this system that helps me while helping everyone else around.
That's right.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around because especially like, unfortunately, Web3, there's a lot, and as you see, like there's a lot of like making a lot of money and rug pulls and people who are purely in it just to like help them, right?
No doubt about it.
And then there's some who are like, hey, this might help all of us. Let's find a way for this to help all of us. And, you know, there's this like, you know, argument that like there's this battle for the soul of Web3. And I totally agree. Like there are very competing interests, and there are people who are coming in with a very extractive mentality. How do I make money at the cost of others? And them are saying, well, how do I help others while helping myself as well, right?
I feel the extractors, you know, like they don't, sure, you can make some money in the short term, but you're not going to last, right? You're not going to. It ultimately does come down to some true fundamentals, right? So another way to phrase it, I think, is, and I love the way you put it, like technology doesn't invent some brand new thing. You know, it innovates. The way I sort of thought about it was technology is growing at an exponential rate. And we as human beings can't wrap our head around exponential growth. You know, like it's just really hard for us. I wrote an article about this, talking about the chessboard problem, right? You know, where it's like if you double a grain of rice, you know, in a chessboard, then by like the second row, you're at, I don't know, trillions and trillions of tons. So we have real difficulty conceptualizing what exponential growth means. Yeah. At the same time, we're still hairless apes. Right. So the one unchanging constant to me is human nature.
Yep.
Right. It's us. It's not that the technology could change, but it's us. So the limitations potentially are kind of us. It's what incentivizes us. It's what benefits us. So I think what we'll ultimately end up seeing with this Web3 development is we'll try all sorts of different things. The ones that last, the ones that make it to the next stage, after the giant collapse, the giant whatever, have to be those protocols, those DAOs, those companies, those whatevers that are really trying to solve a fundamental human problem.
Yeah.
Whether that be connection, whether that be, survival, food, housing, and that's why I'm sort of really excited and passionate about like blockchain real estate, because we're not working in a space where, I don't know, like we're not in the business of like entertainment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like things that are second order needs. We're in the business of shelter. It's a first order need, right? It's like, so whatever we do, first of all, that means that our industry, like this stuff is going to last in whatever form. The technology could go wherever it goes. People still need to live somewhere, right? Like the metaverse is amazing and awesome and all, but you know what? You actually cannot go to the bathroom in the metaverse. Like we have bodies, we're animals. Like those are just fundamental realities.
And a lot is changing about that now. So for example, it matters less and less like where I live per se.
True.
Right? I've seen, for example, this shift of like, whereas like people used to, and I've actually seen it like year by year, 2019,
yep.
Where are you living? 2020, where are you living now? Right. To the point where nowadays, the main thing when I'm connecting with someone for the first time, what am I asking? Am I asking where you live or where you are now? No. I'm asking simply what time zone you're operating in. Mm-hmm. Because even you might be on the West Coast, but you might be operating, on Hong Kong time because if that's where your team is and everything like that. And like things are shifting, but to your point, like people still need to live somewhere.
It's like food, man. We just need it, right? Yeah. I mean, however it gets done, and the technology will improve things in certain ways and not in other ways. But that's one. The second part then is I feel like the more I look into things like DeFi, Web3, Metaverse, all these things, I feel like none of those promises can come true until it somehow affects real estate. Because it's a fundamental need, which is the largest asset class in the world.
Yeah.
Right? So if DeFi, if Web3, if Metaverse doesn't somehow make things better for real estate, whether that be investors, renters, tenants, landlords, property management, agents, brokers, buyers, sellers, unless it somehow affects our industry, it actually can't deliver on its promise.
Yeah.
Right. Which is why I think this is so exciting, which is why I think, I don't know, over the next couple of years, a lot of the guys that are the really brilliant effing geniuses that are working on like the latest automated market maker algorithms or the next layer one chain. I'm hopeful that a lot of them will come into our space and start solving problems in real estate.
So I have a vision. I have two hypotheses as to what we're going to see over the next few years.
Okay.
Do you want to hear?
All right. Yeah, let's hear it.
One, I would say it's a little more conservative. One, we are going to start to see one of the next big institutional buyers not be a hedge fund, not be a public company, but it's going to be a DAO. So you're already starting to see, for example, Links DAO. Again,
golf courses.
Exactly. They were like, hey, let's buy like a golf course, right?
Yeah.
Like, sure, right? Gary Vaynerchuk is like, setting up like a restaurant. There are a bunch of weird, I'm going to call them not like toys because these are experiments. And again, this is a side point and you know this, but like just for the viewer's point, you're going to see a lot of very ridiculous things because nerds like you and I love to play around and come up with crazy ideas. Like, hey, and again, I participate in this. Hey, let's buy a copy of the Constitution.
That's right.
And you're like, oh, that's stupid. That like internet nerds is playing with funny money. And like, dude, in 10 days, $50 million was was collected in a safe way by complete strangers, and they could make collective decisions. Do you think that's something you should laugh at? No, right? Because what happens? Okay, now it's Constitution DAO. Sure, right? Let's buy a copy of the Constitution. In 2 years from now, what if they decide to buy a housing development?
That's right.
Or they decide to buy an apartment building.
That's right.
And they start to run it, right? Like that's going to be the crazy stuff that we're going to start seeing.
And I think that's inevitable, man. I mean, it's going to happen. The barrier that's preventing it from happening right now today is the government.
Yeah.
It's securities law. Right.
And it's also, I think it's a matter of time. So for example, like Cabin DAO and Links DAO, they're figuring out like how does a internet primitive, a bunch of money in a multi-sig wallet, own and operate physical property, right? There's some very good questions to do that. And I feel we're going to figure that out. That's going to be a really interesting one. And I think that's going to happen a lot faster than we think. And I believe once that happens, the floodgates are open. Then it's going to be like, every family office, every person like me saying, well, I could put, $50K or $10K or $1K into a real estate fund, or I can try and buy a cabin and rent out Airbnb, or you know what? I could just go put this money here, and instead of like a 20% fee that a lot of these funds are taking, well, because most of this is done for us via smart contracts, we'll do it for 3%, right?
Or less, 25 basis points, Yeah.
That's going to be fun.
That is going to be fun. When do you,
and can I share the other crazy idea?
Yeah.
And this is much more in line with you. And maybe I'm spoiling this for you. And if you want, you can cut this out. We can talk about this later.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things, to no surprise, the internet has great efficiencies. And there's this Jeff Bezos quote, your take rate is my opportunity. That's being shared a lot in Web3. And again, I'm very, very intentionally oversimplifying it, right? But when you think about the rate of return that you get by depositing your money in a bank as a consumer,
right,
and then what you are paying on your mortgage as a percentage, that's a very big spread. And by the way, it is a bank lending out your money.
That's right.
Not their money, your money.
That's right.
There's, you're seeing other areas of DeFi, and there's a lot of crazy, weird innovation and flat out Ponzi schemes that we see. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But there's this idea that instead we could replace a big semi-extractive company with a board and team and HR and everything like that with just a smart contract. So automated market makers is one of the most straightforward things, where it used to be a bank or a big entity would be the ones that will convert your, rubles into dollars. And now it can just be if I want to convert Bitcoin into Ethereum, I'm not going through a central authority. I'm going through a decentralized index, which actually it's people like Zvi who are depositing, a certain amount of Bitcoin, a certain amount of Ethereum, and I'm creating a liquidity pool. And again, I'm sure 95% of reviewers, if they made it this far,
we just lost them.
No idea, right? Yeah. But if you look up DEXs and AMMs, you'll start to see. But literally now, actually, it is people like me that are providing liquidity between two coins and taking a very small percentage. Don't we think the same is going to happen with all types of lending?
One would hope. Right? And we both know the big obsession with Web3 and DeFi right now is how do you create on-chain credit history, basically, right? Because anonymity and permissionless and all of that is kind of central ethos of this whole world. But they'll figure it out.
Yeah,
I have no doubt.
Central ethos at the moment.
Correct. And we'll see how it all ends up evolving, because the thing that I'm trying to be careful about is, as much as I believe that this is the future, right? There's a danger of buying too much into your own bullshit. You know what I mean? It turns out we thought
maximalism is dead, is a poison here for sure.
Yeah. And yet it's so I struggle with that. And I'm I find that I'm a bit of a Bitcoin maxi, but I'm but these other things are also important, But that's a whole different story. So in a similar way, I do think we're going to see it happen at some point.
Yeah.
There are some barriers in the way. We'll overcome it because no one can ever stop the progress of technology. It is what it is. Like,
and to bring it full circle, that's why, like, I've been, I try not to be like a crypto maximalist or anything like that. And I still say, like, even again, this is not investment advice, but I still say, like, for anyone, my personal take is like, I'm only investing assets into crypto that if I lost it, I would be sad, but I wouldn't necessarily be homeless. Right.
That's right. That's right.
And that's why I've been like focusing on educating people, because whether you believe it's the future or not, I at least want you to understand it so you can make your own decision. Because right now,
completely,
we are witnessing something is happening, and there's a lot of people who still just like don't know what's going on and are afraid to ask the questions, the dumb questions that you and I asked, a couple years ago that brought us to kind of where we are today.
I still keep asking dumb questions. Actually, I try real hard to keep on asking dumb questions because how else are you going to learn, right?
My superpower is to be one of the dumbest people in the room. And yeah, it's one of the, and I've mentioned this to people, like, it's been a while. I've always like tried to necessarily be in rooms where there are smarter people than me and not be afraid to ask the dumb questions, and sometimes intentionally ask dumb questions so everyone else feels comfortable sharing. But it's been a while since I felt so dumb.
I'm with you, man. Most of the white papers I try to go read, I'm like, all right, this is over my head. That's over my head. All right, but but you're right. I mean, like I said, those of us who've been around for .com 1.0, lived through .com 2.0, this is just the same vibe. It's the same feeling. Like, the world just changed.
Yeah.
Not sure exactly how. We're not sure what ultimately this form is going to be, but there's no doubt the world 10 years from now, we're not going to recognize it.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like neuroplasticity, like this idea that like things are going to change and just accept it. There are a lot of like stories that we live off of that will just be completely different. Like, again, like I openly talk about this with my wife, but like my kids, I'm not sure if they're going to go to college. Yeah. They might, instead of going to college, they might be joining the 2 or 3 learning communities, right? That represent them. Like, I'm actually participating in this DAO called Crypto Culture and Society, where they are open. They are rebuilding liberal arts education for the Web3 era. Wow. And I'm like, that's crazy. But let's try it, right? And my kids might be joining that. We're not going to join one company. We're going to join the 3 or 4 DAOs that best represent us at any one point in time. And that may change. We may work for 100 different DAOs over our kind of career. Who knows? That's right. No, you're exactly right. And who knows? There might be no such thing as colleges 10 years out. So we'll see. All right, man. This is a cool ass conversation. If people want to find you, where would they find you, Zvi? Oh man, I'm all over the place. You can find me Zvi.band. It's my website. You could also find me on Twitter. That's probably where I spend most of my time lurking, at Skeevis, Skeevis. All right. And then as you mentioned, you've got 3 companies going now. 3 companies. So there's Good Sphere, which is the training, coaching. Yeah. Good Sphere, Relatable, which is my personal CRM platform. And then Camp Social, camp.social, which is my Web3 social platform that I spend most of my time nerding out on. I also do lots of other weird things like angel investing. I'm on the board of a real estate tech company, and all sorts of other things. But like, I try and focus most of my efforts on that, and then being a decent dad. Which ultimately is the most important job that you could have. So, there's that, right? Exactly. Because again, technology made this, that, and the other thing. Human realities like dad. Exactly. Those things are permanent. Those are eternal. So, hey, thanks for joining us. Thanks for joining our conversation, everybody. Hopefully we didn't nerd out too much. All right. Bye. All right. Thanks, man.